The next presentation this morning is Professor Ross Koppel. All the details are up on the screen. I'm sure he can tell you anything else that he wishes to tell you about himself. I'll just say that he's a professor of sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. You've not come to hear me, you've come to hear him, so I'll leave it over to Ross. Hopefully there'll be time for questions and answers at the end. And I've just been asked if people can fill in the evaluation forms and return them at the end of each session as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So that's some of what I do. And, well, I find my glasses. Why do we so want healthcare IT? Well, for one, obviously, we want to stop handwriting errors. We want to stop the idea of an isolated chart. So with HIT, the data are ubiquitous. They're wherever you can find them, wherever there's a computer. It's immediate. And also it can demand certain clarity of forms so that all prescriptions, for instance, have to specify the route, whether it's a patch or a pill or a suppository or whatever. On the other hand, we have such horror of medication errors, despite the fact that they're pandemic, that we love the idea and we have such faith in technology that we get to that. Now, one of the things that we have to think about in healthcare IT is the extraordinary cost. So in the United States, for a large healthcare system like Harvard or my own at Penn, we're going to spend $1.7 billion. Of that, about $400 million will go to the healthcare IT vendor, in this case Epic, and then about 3 or 4 times that will be spent on the implementation, on linkages to other software in the hospital, on training, on developing specific routines for that hospital. If you calculate all of the hospitals, there are about 5,726 in the United States, it comes down to $3 trillion, which is the amount that we spend on all healthcare over a year. So the cost is extraordinary. And at those amazing costs, there's really very little room for buyer's remorse. If I buy a toaster and my wife says get rid of it, I can afford to throw it out and get another toaster. If the National Health System or the Welsh government spends a few billion or trillion pounds on a healthcare system, there's no room for buyer's remorse. And the question is, how did we get into this mess? How did we start with this? So we started with the idea that we would install it and hope that it would get better. And there's a special place in hell for people who read slides to literate audiences, so I'm going to try not to do that. And this is what we failed to do. This is why we're in the mess we're in. So in the US, the big study that justified what was called the High-Tech Act, which is the funding that created the subsidies and the like for healthcare IT, was based in part on a questionnaire that was sent to all of the hospitals. And the questionnaire said, so what do you need? And the options were, we need more money for implementation, we need some tech support, all of those things up there. But I got a copy of the questionnaire a few years later, and none of the real questions that were needed, none of the questions that I would have asked, that I think in retrospect we desperately should have asked, were given as options to the hospitals. So this is the problem with healthcare IT now, and we didn't ask about that. Do I think that the guys who created the questionnaire were evil and were trying to manipulate the responses? Probably not. I think they were just reflecting their biases, that doctors are stupid, clueless, don't know what they need, and I resent that. I reject that thing. So let's look at HIT in context, in the socio-technical reality. So the first thing, of course, is you have the existing workflow. And a lot of people think that we have to reproduce the existing workflow with the new technology. Others say that, of course, the new technology is so much better, we should do whatever the technology. I'm really agnostic on it. I think there's both advantages in the previous technology, and it may be very stupid. It may be based on paper when we don't have to. The other things are that hospitals are filled with bizarre hierarchies, and we try to be all things to all people who have power. There's up to 500 existing IT systems in a hospital. There was a mean of 300, a low of 150. All of those systems, in one way or another, have to connect to the EHR, to the electronic health record. And each one of those connections is a potential vulnerability. And in fact, to the extent that some of those things connect to each other, it could be 150 factorial. There's culture, but I'm the sociologist who goes, people use culture as an excuse, because how much technological readiness did we need for iPods, for cell phones, for all of the things that we so love? How much technological readiness do doctors and hospitals need for MRIs? And then, of course, the physical plant very, very much affects how the technology is going to be used. And hospitals and training institutions are unique in that they have constant inflow of new doctors, new nurses, and the like. And of course, it's a very limited market. It's not like we're selling billion-dollar healthcare systems to everybody across the UK. So I want to introduce a model that I developed with my friend Michael Harrison, and it's a socio-technical model that we added to. So you introduce new healthcare IT, which of course goes through the social system. This is standard socio-technical. And it goes through the technological and physical infrastructure, which then affects how the healthcare IT is used in practice. Now, here's the new big thing that I added. This, in turn, creates a recursive loop that affects the social system. And this, in turn, goes through the existing healthcare IT, and the doctors and nurses and other clinicians start demanding changes in the healthcare. So it's a loop that is ever evolving. In fact, if it's static, it either is going to kill everyone or it's going to be stopped. And we have to recognize that users renegotiate HIT, healthcare IT, daily. It's never static unless it's dead, and it's always unfolding. We also have to recognize that there's expectations versus the reality. So you never fully finish creating technology, and the problems are very seldom solved by introducing new technology. You have to recognize that the interactions are dynamic. I'm not going to read that. And then recognize, you all can identify that, of course. It's Heraclitus. And it says, of course, that you can't put your foot in the same river twice. And so it is with healthcare IT. It's always evolving. The screen that you used yesterday may not be the screen that you have today. And if you don't have it evolving, then it's going to be frozen. And most importantly here, if you don't allow the physicians and the users to constantly acquire and demand and then create those changes, you're going to create a sense of learned helplessness. You cannot freeze the system and not let people constantly demand changes and improvements. If you do that, you're just going to create a sense of loss and helplessness. Now, I have a bunch of great examples that I think you'll appreciate. So take a look at this. There's a drop-down menu that goes below the screen that the doctor can see. So the doctor sees these slides. Well, I can see my... And what he wants, or what she wants to order, can't be seen because the doctor does not know that if they click, there's a whole another group of options. So they come up with workarounds, they write things, they invent things. And workarounds are a sign that your technology is screwed up, not a sign that the doctors are lazy. Another one is, of course, the copy and paste function. So with copy and paste, you can take a 3-page note and turn it into a 3,000-page note. And in that 3,000 pages, most of it copied and pasted, is the kernel that the physician needs to find to do the work. But you've now obscured it in screen after screen of nonsense. Here's another example. You want to transport a patient from the ER, from the emergency room, 5 feet, 20 feet to the X-ray suite. What are your options? Helicopter is one of the options because nobody parses the screen to make it sensible. They just leave it the way it is. And here's another one. You're scrolling through the system to treat an 83-year-old man, and you have to scroll past fetal monitor as one of your options. I mean, this is crazy. We treat doctors' time as infinitely elastic. So I took one of the most common measures available, blood pressure, and I looked at the ways in which blood pressure is used across the many systems. So the first three, 125, 75, is where they're on the same row. The second one, they're on the same column. The third, also reasonable, they're in the same cell with a slash. After that, it's Alice in Wonderland, Never Never Land. So this fourth one, the programmers put it diastolic first because it's higher in the alphabet, and then 2 screens later, systolic, lower in the alphabet. But if there are any physicians out there, you need to see those 2 numbers together. And then the other things, all of them, are important pieces of information that the physician felt she or he had to include, and they're reasonable, but why the hell didn't we give them an extra box so they could first put the 2 numbers that they need? And it goes on. And on. That I was once attacked by somebody saying, well, these are rare. And then 3 doctors raised their hand and said, well, they're not. And also you're missing stable. It says my power is going to go off in a minute. Is there anybody with a cord to this? Oh, I don't know. I'll ignore it. So how do you combine information across the many systems in the UK if we have 40 different ways of recording blood pressure, the simplest of measures? And talk about interoperability. I love that. So this is a growth chart. We have found growth charts going back to 1840 in medical textbooks. And they work by allowing the physician, the pediatrician, to see both the growth rate of height and the growth rate in terms of weight. Okay. I've lost my monitor here, but that's all right. With the magic of healthcare IT, we enabled the developers of the system to separate out the two charts so that they're separate. So what does this mean? In this chart, where they're together, the pediatrician can see this little dent. That's what they call that, a dent. And it means either perhaps that the child had some stomach difficulties or the child was abused or something like that. But with the magic of the computer systems, we've isolated the two screens from each other, thus ensuring that the pediatrician can't see what's actually happening to the kid. Now, this is another example. These are the ways in my own healthcare system that the default for medications are shown: 5 milligrams, 4 milligrams, 1 milligram, 7. And you might think that 5 milligrams is the standard, 4 is for skinnier people, 1 is adjunctive therapy or for kids. No. 5, 4, 1 is the alphabetical order in the English language. The word 5 comes before the word 4. It could be that 1 milligram is the standard dose. 5 is only used in extremis. 7 is used for multiply obese patients or something like that. So we asked the vendor to change it in an order that makes sense for the dosage, because remember, young doctors start out with 0 weeks of practice, and we're constantly training new doctors, and they're constantly rotating, and they gave us the runaround. Another example. So the doctor checks no allergies, and then perhaps because the doctor was well-trained in grammar school or high school, the doctor says, oops, it's really no known allergies. What does the computer do with that? The computer defines it as multiple allergies. So we learn that when you see multiple allergies, it means no allergies. But of course, there are millions of people with multiple allergies. And so we end up ignoring the allergies and then kill the patient. Here's another example. In the United States, unlike most weights for adults, all children's weights are placed in kilograms. Unfortunately, Americans have no idea what a kilogram is, so maybe the system changed it so that the physician could talk to the mother and changed it to pounds. Unfortunately, you don't see the metric there. Ah, great. You don't see the metric. So the next doctor came up and thought it was kilograms and double-dosed the baby and killed it. Real case. This slide is stunning in its honesty. It says, please review all results carefully. There are no positive indicator flags. So the question is, why the hell don't you show positive indicator flags? This is an example where the physician receives an alert, a computer decision support alert saying this dose is too high, or this drug interacts with that drug, don't do it. And there was a text box underneath it. But it turned out that the hospital system could not read the text box. So the person in charge asked the vendor, well, if we can't read it, and I don't know why we can't read it, can you at least remove the box? And they said, listen to the words, I'm sorry, this software is hardwired. So she said, well, put a note in the box saying, don't write anything here because nobody will ever see it. And they said, I'm sorry, that box is hardwired to be empty and unreadable. So after a couple of months, actually a year, Amy Chissard got access to the box. Now, most of the time, the doctors wrote dit, or because I said so, or XXX. But 1 out of 100 would say things like, do not change this order. This patient needs this medication this way. Here is my home phone. Here is my girlfriend's phone. Here is my wife's phone. Call me. Don't change this. In my own hospital, we have something equally stupid. There's a box that's available for text that accepts 2,000 characters. Why? Nobody knows. So if the doctor is counting the characters she or he is typing instead of thinking about what the hell they're typing, and they remember to stop after 1,950 characters and write a note saying, "Dear reader, I am going to open up another box," which of course you can't see unless you know that it's possible. Please click to open the next box. But of course, nobody does that. So the doctor, if he or she knows about it, opens up another box, continues the note, but what the next doctor sees is just one box. And unless it happens to end with, and the patient complains about, you're lost, stupid, fix it. So you should always say in conclusion, because it makes the audience, gives the audience hope. If you think you've sent something to somebody, but they don't get it, it's dangerous. Now, anyone who has ever sent an email to somebody and not have it responded to, or anyone who's ever talked to a teenager knows that saying something or sending an email is not quite the same thing as having it received. Putting information in the text box or in the box with a lab report is not the same thing as knowing that it will be received. And the fact that the information is all over the place is almost never obvious. You don't know you're missing the needed information, and it's not clear where it is. So that's dangerous. And the lack of standardization, the fact that we can have 40 ways of recording blood pressure or 50 ways of defining congestive heart failure or whatever, means that we can't get the interoperability we need, and we don't have the ability to learn from the vast oceans of data available to us in all of the healthcare systems. We are losing the possibility of creating a learning health system by this isolation of terms and this siloing of information. So, how do we fix it? What I do is I use the skills of interviewing what you would call trainees, junior doctors, consultants, of course the IT leaders and the others. I focus on the people who are actually using the system rather than those who no longer use it. I shadow them, because if you ask people to report what they're doing, it turns out that they are horrific reporters of their own actions. If I asked you, how many clicks does it take you to get on in the morning and read your email? You might say 4, 7. You'd have no idea, and you'd probably be very wrong. But if I watch you do it and then ask you questions about it, I have a better understanding. Obviously, the rest, failure mode and effect analysis, morbidity and mortality conferences, not Radio Corporation of America, but rather root cause analysis. All of these things have to be teased out by constant vigilance, by being on the floor constantly and doing it. And now, last slide. You cannot put flour into a cake after you've baked it. You cannot install safety and usability after the software is built and designed. It has to be designed and created from the get-go. It has to be built in as part of the process. You'll always be tinkering it. It's never set. You're always working on it and improving it. But you can't add safety and usability post hoc. Thank you. So I have very intentionally left time for questions. If there's a microphone floating around or if you can scream incredibly loudly, you're most welcome. No question? Okay. So, do you have a mic? I'll tell you what. Here's a mic.
Hi. Thanks very much, Ross. That was music to my heart. I'm giving a presentation this afternoon, and I think one of my slides says, we've solved the technology problems, it's the people problems. So my thing is interoperability. What strikes me is your, I think, second last slide was it is about asking the people on the ground. And too often I've sat in what are supposed to be standards meetings where old men like myself pontificate about how things should be. And we've long since been the ones on the front rows. And the only people that can get to those meetings are old men like me. You don't see patient reps, you don't see junior doctors, you certainly don't see any nurses because they're too goddamn busy on the wards working. So my question is, the kind of process that you're driving there within an institution, that may scale, you're one guy who could do that within an institution. How do we do that across an entire health system? Because it's that level of interoperability. How do we get a large community of people to say, how do we represent a blood pressure, but using those techniques and that mindset?
Well, so I hope everyone heard that. I did. There are two sort of solutions available. One is to have the vendors agree on it three. The vendors collectively agree on it. Two is to have the government make a decision based on the best data from all kinds of people and the vendors. And three is working together. Now, in the US, we didn't have it because we were focused on getting the stuff sold and implemented out there because we thought that by definition, more healthcare IT equals greater patient safety. And we ignored the fact that more healthcare IT equaled building the Tower of Babel higher and higher and higher, despite the fact that it's much better than paper. I'm not a Luddite. I very much believe in this stuff. I have suggested that we put all of the vendors in a room, all of the vendor CEOs in a room with 6 months worth of oxygen and told them that they have all the time they need to develop agreed upon standards. If they were making progress at the end of 6 months, we'd remove the dead bodies. If they weren't, we'd leave them in and put in the junior vice presidents to keep on going at. Now, obviously, that's psychotic. But the idea is we cannot allow this excess of democracy in terms of data standards when this is the mother's milk of science and medicine and learning. And how can we learn across all of these systems if everybody has their own definition of, a broken arm or something like that? My God, it's, the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution started in England with mechanics, they were called. Now we call them engineers, but they were mechanics and wheelwrights and people like that. And they started developing standardization for screws. Because when you have screws that are standardized, you can make small adjustments to scientific instruments. So that allows you then to build this whole system. And we need that simple level of standardization. And we ain't got it. And it's killing us, literally. More question. Yeah, somebody give that man a microphone.
Why do you think design stupidity is so prevalent?
Wait, I'm sorry. Here, I'll give you my mic. Go.
Why do you think design stupidity is so prevalent in healthcare IT if it's for such an important thing?
Why do I think design stupidity? Well, for one, there's so much money that went into, I can't go in front of the speaker. There's so much money that went into the design, and the complexity of the systems are so great that once you have it there, it's very hard to fix. I think there's one hospital here in Wales that has something like 64 different infusion pumps. Each one has different ways of programming, so the probability that a nurse will make a mistake is stunningly high compared to if they were all the same. And these things cost so bloody much. And also, they have to be approved by regulatory bodies very often. And so people are apprehensive about changing them. And basically it's follow the money, the time to development, the regulatory concerns, and the fact that we just don't put that much effort in a priori. Yes?
That was a lovely... That was a lovely talk, Ross, and I enjoyed your cake example because it summarizes in just a quick image what's wrong if you add flour to a cake afterwards. But of course, if you add flour to a cake and people still buy it, and if you add Wi-Fi to the cake and they buy more cakes, your analogy breaks down. So the question is, how can we help hospitals and health trusts and so on to buy cakes that are safe to eat?
Well, I don't know how to do it in the UK. I know in the United States, we give a lot of money to hospitals to buy systems that have been approved. And if I were czar of healthcare IT, I would not approve systems that don't have safety and usability built in from the get-go. In the UK, I don't know. I think we could hold them. If I were the owner of a fleet of trucks and I bought trucks that were dangerous, I could be sued and kicked out of business. We can't do that to a hospital because where the hell else are we going to put our sick people? And creating these systems de novo, as some of you in the audience know, is just stunningly expensive and time-consuming. So we're sort of stuck with what we have, but we can do uniform testing and uniform analysis in ways that are far better than what we do now. Not a perfect answer, but take the mic.
I think when we buy cakes that have got flour on, carrying on with your analogy, we ought to collect evidence of what damage it does and publish it without fear of the confidentiality clauses that are often imposed. The secrecy with the problems and the inability to see them and spread them and make them public, I think is probably the biggest problem.
Well, in the United States, many vendors, and I published an article on this in the Journal of the American Medical Association, include two clauses that read as follows. One, we are held harmless of any and all errors associated with this. We simply create a tool that is used by a learned intermediary, a doctor, a nurse, a pharmacist, a technician, and we are not responsible for any errors, even if we've been repeatedly informed. Now, that is a clause that somebody can put in that has millions of different interpretations, and vendors, in fact, make millions of repairs yearly to their systems. On the other hand, both the Institute of Medicine and a couple of other medical societies have called that clause unethical, but it's unclear whether it's been removed. The second clause speaks directly to what you were talking about, which is a non-disclosure clause, which says that if I see a screen that's dangerous, I can show it to my buddy across the hallway. I can send the vendor an announcement with a screenshot, but I cannot publish that screen and send it to all my fellow clinicians or internists or whatever without danger of being sued. Clearly, that clause is disgusting and has to be removed. And without that level of transparency, also in the United States, the system can be submitted to the government for a study of usability analysis. But the vendors are not required to say if they sent the system or not, and the vendors are not required to say what the results were of that usability test. So we have lack of transparency A and lack of transparency B. The worst of both worlds. Yes?
Can I just add on to Harold's point there, at the risk of stretching the metaphor too far, is the issue here that when you're starving, bad cake is better than no cake?
Right, and we don't want to go back to paper. We can't go back to paper. And the systems offer many advantages. I'm not a Luddite, But I think the systems can be a hell of a lot better than they are. There was a hand up there. This gentleman. Here.
Okay, so the way Google handles systems like this, because there's been huge security breaches, is it tells the company that you have 6 months to fix this problem we've notified within your system, and if you don't fix it within the 6 months, we publish and we tell everybody. Now, that's the system Google is using across to regulate Microsoft and Apple and other big companies with the like. Now, do you think that system could work if a regulatory body was up to the job in healthcare?
Well, these systems are so complex. I've learned that you can ask a vendor to do some things and they will try mightily, but remember also that each system is configured by the hospital according to the other existing IT systems, the new systems around, the local laboratories that report to them, the local pharmacies that they must work with, plus their own internal pharmacies. I have argued that if a hospital or a physician identifies a patient safety danger, that the vendor should be given X number of whatever to fix it. But then you get into this morass of what's a patient safety danger, what's fixable. As my colleague Mark Overhedge over there has pointed out, you fix something and you successfully fix it, and then you've broken 4 other things. It's really tough, but yes, we should have total authority to say exactly what they're working on, what they've done, and how they're going to fix it and by when, and then have that testing, as Harold says, be totally open and available to all parties. I think we're free.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. If there are, I can't see any more hands with any other questions. I'm sure Ross will be around if anybody does have issues and questions they want to ask of him individually. We do have now time, a short break before the plenary session in here starting at 12 o'clock when the people from the big data session will be coming in to feedback. So you have a few minutes to stretch your legs after you finally thank Ross for his presentation. Thank you.